Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, we return for part 2 of our interview with Steelhead Alley OG, Jeff Blood. If you missed part 1, the link is in the show notes. We pick up right where we left off with Steelhead tactics and move on to discuss Jeff's new Steelhead rods. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And as we continue to create and distribute more diverse content, you may want to consider downloading our iOS or our Android app. We organize our content by category, so you can go straight to the content that interests you the most. The apps are free, and the links are in the show notes. Alternatively, just search The Articulate Fly where you get your mobile apps. Now, on to the interview. Yeah, no. So, I mean, it's interesting too. And I was wondering, what you thought the biggest mistake most steelhead anglers make.
Wading in the water. Okay. I watch, first of all, just because you own a pair of waders doesn't mean you need to use them. And so, especially in these smaller streams, the fish want to lay as close as like 3 feet off the bank. And they want to try to, most of the time when they're potting up and holding in a pool, they want to be comfortable. So, most life, food, love, and shelter, right? So they're coming up for the love. We don't need to do anything about that. They need food and shelter. So they want to lay where they can be comfortable, yet get some food, come and buy them, and so on and so forth. And I watch people not stay feet dry, but walk right in, and all they're doing is pushing the fish that were laying right there into the pool, out into the current. And, you can catch, when I say out in the current, out into the faster current where they don't really want to be. And I would say stand back. And then when they cast, if they have a 10-foot rod, the rest of the fish are underneath their rod. And so they're not fishing to them. And on Elk Creek, in Erie County especially, I'll look downstream and say, well, they're not fishing to the fish. Sometimes the ledges are also caused by, or the ledge is the cause of the softer water. If that makes sense. And so they're laying along the ledge, which they wade into and scare them out of. And that's where they want to be. So that would be the first thing. The other thing that I think fishermen don't do is they don't put enough weight on. I mean, if I was going to change any variable first, I would change weight. And, I would make sure I'm rigged correctly. But once you're rigged correctly, if you're not catching them, you're either in the wrong spot or you're just not getting down to them.
Yeah, it's always interesting to try to give people that nymphing advice and ask them what they think their indicators should be doing so that they know that they're down, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always interesting, right? Because I think, you talk to people and, it always amazes me how few people understand that the water at the bottom is slower than the water at the top. So if the indicator's not moving, at or slightly slower than the current speed at the top, you're probably not down.
Well, that's true. And I'm contemplating, I'd like to do a couple of videos for YouTube. I'm trying to figure out how to do it so that they will be meaningful to people when they watch them. But, I'll throw an example out. My brother, 2 years older than me, he's fished all his life, but he was a hunter when steelhead was in its day back then. He was hunting, I was fishing. And now he's, seen the light and he's trying to fish. And we fished together 2.5 weeks ago when I was up there fishing. And I'm watching him cast, and his leader is bouncing upstream. Okay, so a fly is hitting above, the split shot are just below that, his indicator is below that, and the fly line hits the water. There's instantly an arc in the line. So in reality, what's going on, if you don't mend, okay, and every time you mend, you move whatever's underneath unless you have a good touch. Most people don't. And so it's creating instant drag. And because he said to me, he said, why are you catching way more fish than I'm catching? I said, well, I'm fishing differently. And, he said, what do you mean? I said, well, watch where your leader hits. Now, the reason that his leader is going upstream is one of two things. Either he's got something out of balance where the connection is. And Flip Pallet just did a thing with Mad River Outfitters where they're talking about cutting a loop out and whatever, and what that does to the leader and the cast. And there's a little bit of truth in what they're saying. But in reality, it's mostly the casting stroke. So if I bring the rod back close to me, and then on my back cast, bring my arc to the outside of me, and I'm coming kind of like I want to throw a curveball, you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And I cast forward, my leader's going to automatically go upstream because of momentum. What you want to do is bring it the other way, bring it outside, and then bring it past the ear straight out. And it's just a simple adjustment. And let me say that again, bring it outside and bring it past your ear. And you know what I'm saying, Marvin, it's mechanics. If you understand the mechanics, your leader will fire straight out. And then if you make a slight bend, your leader's straight from it, you're throwing your leader upstream, allowing your fly to tuck down in. And then as it floats down, it'll straighten out. And that's when you get your detection, because you got to get down first. And so, it's all those little adjustments. And I'm trying to, other things that I do is I list a lot of, I fish a big indicator. And everybody says, why do you fish such a big indicator? And now the indicator I fish is in line, as opposed to a thingamabobber or one of those that's kind of floppy. And there's nothing wrong with those indicators. I just don't like them in steelhead fishing. Okay. And lots of guys fish them and they fish very successfully. It's just not for me. I like the inline indicator because, one, it's balanced and I don't get any flop in the wind. I don't get any of that stuff. And now that big indicator also allows me to pick my fly line off the water between me and the indicator, especially in these small streams. So, you're only fishing 10 to 20 feet away from you. And, so you're kind of like not high stick in the sense of you're feeling the bottom, but you're bringing it up to the indicator and you're taking all that play out of the line to get that natural straight drag-free drift. And, I've shown that to, I have two young guys. When I say young, they're men in their mid-30s. But, they're enthusiastic and trying to learn. And they showed up and we were fishing on the Grand River. And, I was catching some fish. They weren't. I watched them fish. Mechanically, they were pretty good. They could cast, knew how to wade. They'd done some fishing. They just needed a little bit of refinement. And that little bit of refinement was in their leader, their weight, and then how they made the drift. And one of the guys went from catching, 3 or 4 fish a day. The last time I fished with him, he took the hook out of over 30. And he's doing it every time now. Now, one of the guys that I also fished with just moved to Florida. He was catching more fish than that, but I think I fished with him one day where I know I saw him hook over 50. I don't know how many he landed, and that was in about 3 hours. So, we lose a lot of them because of where we're at and the size of the fish. But, and that's just because of refinement. And it's not that much sometimes. It's just a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because when you talk about that, using those larger indicators that are in line, it also helps you not pull your rig off the bottom, because it gives you a little bit of a greater margin for error when you mend, so that you're not inadvertently pulling your rig 3 or 4 inches off the bottom every time you mend it.
Absolutely. So Phil makes those balsa indicators. They're really good. And then the ones I'm fishing, which I'm getting low on, by the way, are the ones from frog hair. And I use there's two types. One of them, it's a one and done. So when you take it off your line, it's done.
Yep.
I use the reusable ones. And, even with that, though, I shouldn't say this. Once I rig my steelhead rod up, it's rigged up from when I rig it up until I tear it down in the spring. So, anyway.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've got both flavors of those frog hairs, and then I've actually got probably 3 or 4 pouches of the small black and white prototype inline ones that are probably, I don't know, 1/3 of an inch long.
Yeah, well, we played around with a lot of that stuff way back, and innovating the ideas and trying to come up with them. And we can talk about that later, I guess. But they really work well, at least for me.
Yeah, and so it's funny too. Like while we're talking about frog hair, you were involved with them, when I met you on Cattaraugus Creek, but you didn't start out in the fly fishing industry. And I was curious, what you did before frog hair and how you made the transition.
Well, so I was real fortunate out of college to, I'll say, luck into a job. I never used my degree. I needed a job out of desperation. I begged this guy for a job. I begged him so much that I think he said, let's shut him up. And they gave me a job. And I ended up in what was called the premium and incentive industry. So we, as a company, we structured promotions for various different corporate entities, from consumer promotions and trade incentives and sales incentives and safety award programs for manufacturing and mines and all that kind of stuff. And it was absolutely a tremendous and exciting job. And I learned a ton. So I called on the vice presidents and directors of sales or marketing for most major corporations. My client list was extensive. I did a lot of business with Apple. I did a lot with Xerox and Campbell Soup Company and H.J. Heinz and a lot of the big major banks, Mellon Bank and PNC Bank, and just on and on and on. And if you remember back in the day when they gave away toasters and all that kind of stuff in a bank, I actually was selling the toasters and all that stuff that was given away to the person that actually had the sales force that called on banks. And I had the good fortune of structuring a really huge promotion. That's one of the things I'm proudest of, not because of the size, but because of the impact that it did to the entire distribution chain and for the communities. And it was called Apples for the Students. Down your way, I don't know where it ran. I think, are there Piggly Wigglies in your area?
Yeah, there are Piggly Wigglies.
Yeah, I think Piggly Wiggly ran it. It was called Apples for the Students. And this was before there were computers in the classroom. And the community would collect cash register receipts, turn them into the school of their choice, and then aggregate the receipts. And for every $100,000 worth of receipts, they got a free computer for the class or for the school. And in a 12-year period, we shipped over $500 million worth of computers and another $500 million worth of sporting goods and electronics and whatever. And it was just a tremendous promotion. And in the end, I made a lot of money on it. So, it was quite a career. The other interesting thing is, because I had this client list, and these clients would have to tell me what their business problem was and all their issues. And I would watch how we would construct working with the client. Often the client, you would talk them through the process and they would come up with their own solution as you're talking to them. And, we would solve it. And then, I'd get up and go make another sales call down the road and see a similar business problem in a different, type of business. But, the problem was almost identical in how you solved it. So you'd pick up that technique and pull it down there and sell it to them. Kind of like fishing. You learn a technique, you take it and redeploy it to a different river or whatever you're doing. And so, over time you have 200 just good ideas because they all teach you something. You learn from others. Same thing with guides. Every guide, not every guide, but a lot of the guides would teach me some little simple trick, like, how to tie an approved clinch knot and put it on the bend of your hook. There's such a simple way to do that. And I was taught that by Brad Downey on the Bighorn River. And it's like, oh my goodness. Because if you actually try to tie it by twisting it, 6 times around and do all that on the bend of the hook, it takes you forever to do it because the wind's blowing and it comes off and whatever. Well, there's another way that's so fast, it's like 5 seconds or 6 seconds. But the point is that they all taught me these little tricks. And all of a sudden, because I fished around the world, I've got 200 tricks that most people don't have. They're not mine. I mean, I was taught them, but they're mine in the sense I now have them to use. And, it just makes you a better fisherman. Anyway, that's what I did in business.
Yeah. And so, we'll talk about Jeff Blood fly fishing. You were at Frog Hair, and then kind of between there and Jeff Blood fly fishing, you were with Mystic Rods and Net Staff. You want to tell folks a little bit about that part of your journey?
Yeah. So, 2 things. In 1998, when I was running my sales promotion agency, a greengrass golf pro came into my office, and I knew him. We were friends, and he had been terminated from his position, and he took a job with Gamma Technologies, which is the manufacturer of most of the tennis racket string that people use today. And what Gamma was doing was irradiating the cores of golf balls with gamma rays. And the founder, Dr. Harry Ferrari, worked for Westinghouse Nuclear Fuels Division, and his job was to study the effects of gamma radiation on all of the materials within a reactor vessel, basically to understand maintenance and maintenance schedules. And in doing so, he found out that he could alter the attributes of gamma with a process of irradiation. And what it's basically doing is breaking down the long chain molecule and cross-linking it. And, he could bring certain attributes out of it. Well, he ended up deploying that in the manufacture of tennis racket strings in nylon, and was able to replicate the attributes of natural catgut, which is very expensive, with nylon at about a tenth the price, and hence built this business, which is still there and thriving today as far as I know. And so when this guy walked into my office, Bob, he wanted me to look at their marking on their golf balls, and I looked at it, and it was a mess. Okay, and I kept asking about this tennis racket string, and I said, "Isn't it fishing line?" And long story short, he said, "Well, it is." And I said, "Why aren't they making fishing line then if they can make it better?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "We'll find out." He set an appointment up for me, and I went down and met with him. And we talked about it and said, "Yeah, we can improve it. What do you want it to do?" And I told him what I thought Tippett Materials should do to improve it. And I gave him, I'd gone over to the fly fishing store here in Pittsburgh called International Angler, which I was an owner of at one time, and gave him a bunch of samples. And for me, they convinced me right out of the gate. I mean, they made it better. I won't say the brands that we used, but they were all the brands that they sold. And we then talked and struck a deal. and I said, I can help you get into the fishing market. And we did. And we built frog hair tippet and leader material, frog hair tippet and leader material first. And then we went into the conventional tackle side. We were very successful at it. And then, I don't know, someone in management decided that it was time to get rid of Jeff Blood because they didn't need his expertise anymore. And we had a contract dispute. I left, and they basically crashed and burned. And then, a year and a half later, took it and sold it off to a new guy, Dale Black, super guy. He bought it. He's a bass fisherman. He bought it for the conventional side. They worked the frog hair side, but not very aggressively. And it's still in some places, but it's great material. As long as they're irradiating that product, and I don't know if they still are or aren't, they irradiate it under the formula. It's a superior product.
Yeah, very neat. And so from frog hair, I know you did some work with Mystic rods, because I can remember, I think we were talking a couple calls back. I can remember that was kind of part of the episode you did with the new fly fisher. You want to tell folks a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I was at the Somerset, New Jersey show, which is now Edison, New Jersey, quite a few years ago. Colin McEwen from the new fly fisher. We had done a couple of TV programs on Steelhead. And he walked me over to this booth. He said, "Hey, I think you ought to talk to this guy by the name of Dennis Klein." And Dennis was one of the founders of Mystic. There were two partners at the time. And, we chatted for a few minutes. That was in January. And he said, "Boy, I really would like to fish with you." And I said, "Well, okay." Long story short, they came in March, he and his partner. And, we're gearing up and whatever. And he pulls a rod out and he hands it to me and said, "I'd like you to fish this rod. I think you're going to find it the best rod you've ever fished." I've kind of heard all that before. Everybody thinks their rod's the best, and, everybody thinks their reel's the best. And you know what I'm saying? And some of them are really good, and some of them, they're all the same. So I rigged the rod up and I'd go down to the stream. And that year in February, we were on the East Branch of Cognac Creek, and it was just chock full of fish everywhere. And, so I'd make a couple casts, and it was like effortless. You got two big split shot on there, big indicator, a couple of flies, and it was like, boom, bang, it was right there. And it was like, wow. It almost like startled me. I won't say the brand that I was fishing, but it was a high-end brand prior to that. And, okay, you got my attention here. And then I have to mend the line, obviously, as I'm fishing, and it just reacted really fast. And that can be critical. Marvin, you know this, that if you can get your mend in real quick, you just get a longer, better grip. And so it was very responsive. And then the thing that really got me was when I finally hooked the fish. And there's a lot of, deadfalls and stuff in the stream and whatever. And sometimes you got to, lean on the fish. And, when you're fishing 3X tippet and you got an 8-pound fish on, you can't do too much, but you got to do enough. And it's kind of a refinement. It was like, wow, this rod is really doing a great job. So I was impressed. We went to dinner that night and we were talking, and I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with it." I said, "What's it sell for?" He said, $400. And at the time, the high-end rods were selling for, $600 and $700. And I said, "Well, how come that price? Is it inferior some way?" And he goes, "No." He said, we're better in every way than all the rods." And I said, "Well, why would you do that?" And basically, it's a mistake that a lot of startups do, is they think they're going to get into the market based on price. And what they're really doing to themselves often, okay, because nothing's ever exact, but is they were creating a perception that they can't be as good as another rod because they're not selling at the same price. So Dennis came back to me a little bit later and he said, well, you got a lot of marketing experience. Would you be willing to help me? And I discounted what I normally would do and was just wanted to try to help him. And, I got some free rides out of it and I was happy. And we did this comparison. I said, well, Dennis, I need to understand what your rod is really all about. So we took 3 other brands. I won't say who they are because I'm not into ditching anybody. There's lots of good companies out there. But we took these 3 other brands and we did a comparison from the bottom of the rod all the way through every component, through the material, through the weight of the rod, so on and so forth. And in every category, he was equal to or better with components and materials and so on and so forth. And what really made his rod different was the mandrel that it was rolled on, which results in the taper. And the taper really, once you eliminate, what is it, differences in material, all that kind of stuff, and say everything's made out of the same thing, same tender loving care, so on and so forth, the taper is going to change the performance of the rod. And that's really what was important there. So I said, well, Dennis, I don't know what to tell you other than, I think you should put together a little marketing campaign that says Dare to Compare. It would be like doing the old Pepsi Coke taste test. Okay. Now, I need to put a little caveat in here. I did lots of what I'll call placebo testing in my career, right? And what people think and why they think it. And often, like with tippet material, I'd give somebody a control spool, tell them something, and they would, give me an answer about it. And then I'd say, well, let me give you another one. And I'd give them another control spool with a different number, which is the same product, and they'd give me a totally different answer. And that's just how that kind of works. You're trying to understand how people think and whatever. But back to Mystic, Dennis, he did a lot of, he's a very smart guy. He did a lot of his own things right. He's very likable, worked hard, traveled out west selling his rods, doing the things that you need to do to be successful and build a very successful business, and then turned around and sold it. I don't know for how much money, but it was life-changing for Dennis. And that's where I got and learned about rods and made some contacts, on bringing in my own rods. So.
Yeah, interesting. And so, I know before you got to Jeff Blood fly fishing, I think you actually kind of developed Net Staff. You want to talk about that a little bit more before we kind of dive into the rods that you're making now?
Yeah. So I wish I could do that one over again on Net Staff. A friend of mine, well, let me back up. So, as you start to age, I used to jump off the bank, plow into the water, wade across any riffle I wanted to in my youth, and, no problem. As you age, you're just not as stable. I have to kind of calculate how I'm going to get off the bank now. And, even when I was young and a good waiter, there were times I wanted to carry wading stuff. Well, why don't we? Because they're a pain in the neck. You got to pull them out, unfold them. If you leave them out, they tangle in your fly line. If you don't put them away, they're just causing problems. And then you got to fold them back up and put them back in. And that's kind of why we don't. So I was trying to come up with a method where I could carry it with me, conquer a couple of different things, have my net, where to carry it, so on and so forth. And I had made a prototype, and I had it with me, and I had it hooked to my back. And I took a hunting friend with me, a guy that I had done some big game hunting with, fishing on the Ashtabula. And it was pushing a lot of water, and he kept saying, "Hey, can I use your net staff? Can I use your net staff to wade across?" And then he'd hook a fish. And, "Hey, can I use your net staff?" And when we got done at the end of the day, I said, "So, Carl, how many times did you ask to use my net staff?" He said, "Oh, man, 30 or 40. And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I think you got a product." He said, "What's your drawback?" I said, "Well, I don't have the resources right now based on everything else that I'm doing to develop it." So he came in and said, "Well, I'll help you do that." I said, "Okay." So we started down that path, and we did. And, we're still friends today. I ended up selling out to him because it just wasn't catching on like it needed to, and there wasn't enough revenue to pay two people what we both needed to be paid, and I just let them have it. Now, if I could redesign that, there's a couple things I would change. I would make it much lighter. We just overbuilt everything, and I would have a way of incorporating the net without it having a handle on the top and still wade, because the handle in shallow water would get in the way of netting a fish. But, he sold quite a few of them, and, it was an interesting development learning curve, and there's still a need for that type of product in the market.
Yeah, I think it's, talking about trying to be a smarter wader, the older you get, I think if you kind of go through life and you kind of watch what's going on, it's interesting to kind of see how all of those successes and failures, and I think probably more of the failures than the successes, really kind of help to kind of, inform what we do. And so, here you are today at Jeff Blood Fly Fishing, and you're pulling that, everything you learned, a lifetime in fishing, but also kind of up close and personal with Mystic Rods. So tell us a little bit about your company.
Well, so what started this endeavor is there's a couple of fly patterns, and I'm going to kind of give you the history as briefly as I can, that Fly Fisherman wrote an article about it, and, people caught on with it and everything. And I'm online one day looking at it, and, the blood dots being like tied and sold by all these fly tires everywhere. And I'm thinking, that's my fly pattern. I'm not making a penny out of it. The same thing with what we call the white death white zonker. It was kind of my innovation, and I brought it to the market and shared it with people, and it just exploded because it catches fish. And, the tires are time, and I don't begrudge any of them for doing that. I mean, they're in business, and they're going to tie what's being demanded. And I finally said, you know what, I'm going to go do it myself. But I can't tie enough flies. I'm not going to tie flies to try to make a living, because,
You're older and wiser now. You know better than that.
Yeah. So I went out and did a lot of research, and, where to have them tied. And I know a lot of people in the industry, so I know, the big players and so on and so forth, and found the company that I thought I could do it with and bring it in at the right price where I can sell it to the wholesale trade, and they can sell it and still, sell it at a reasonable price, and everybody can make money, and I can sell it to the consumer. Well, as I was doing that, I got a phone call from, I'm not going to mention names because I really don't want to, but I got a phone call about the ability to build some fly rods to my own specifications, the way I would like them built. And, I started that conversation, had some prototypes built, brought them in, fished them, tweaked them a little bit, and did whatever, especially on the 7 and 8 weights for Steelhead. And then looked at it, what's my financial commitment? I'm 66. I don't necessarily need to work, but I don't know what I would do if I didn't work, because I can't fish every day and I can't shut my brain down. So I just decided that I'm going to, import some fly rods. I know where. So part of my past career when I ran the sales promotion agency is we sold a lot of merchandise. We sold over $100 million worth of consumer products on an annual basis. And I've worked a lot with Philips Magnavox as an example. And they source product all over the world. And I understand, the distribution model and supply chain and all the different things and quality of stuff and, what the issues were with importing and all that type of thing. So I had a lot of experience with that. And I have a gentleman I work with in Korea who is, if you know the Korean culture in general, they are perfectionists. They build high quality product. They're very efficient. China, not so much. I mean, China, you got to guard China like crazy. If you don't have someone watching after you, you get a really good sample, but when your shipment comes in, it could be a wreck. Not always. I mean, there's good product made in China too. But, I negotiated with this person and said, look, I just need to assure myself and have the assurance from you that when this product comes to me, that it is at the exact specifications that, we've outlined in the performance. And, I'll make a comment about one of the wading shoe companies, great company. That stuff's all imported. They had an issue one year where the soles of the shoes were falling off. Basically, not all of them, but what happened is the factory ran out of waterproof glue and they needed glue. So they go down the street and they just get glue and they glue on the bottoms. And when they come in, you look at them and say, they look great. But now you're standing in the middle of the river and all of a sudden your bottom comes off because the factory changed the specification and nobody's watching after it. So that's the first thing that I needed to do for myself is to make sure I can make all those headaches go away because I hate creating work for anybody. I also hate creating disappointment with people. So once I knew that I had that locked in and I had prototyped and fished my products, I decided I'm going to go ahead and make the commitment. The commitment's pretty big. I mean, you got to bring in, 7 figures in product and to start, and you can't sell anything without it. So you got to do that in advance of having any kind of, relationship with any customers. I mean, I know a lot of people, but, you walk into a fly shop today and they've got, 4 to 10 brands of fly rods. They need another brand of fly rod, like a hole in the head. But at the same time, I had that same issue with frog hair tippet material when we first started out. And someone said to me back then, why do you want to build tippet material? I said, because I can build it better. And that's what I think I've done. Now, the issue is this, that you can't know something's better until you know it's better. And so there's a perception in everybody's mind that, I only need to spend this amount or whatever. The thing of it is, if you're spending $150 on a rod, probably the manufacturing cost of that's like, I'm just going to throw a number out, $15 to $30. Actually, it's $15 to build it. But by the time you add on all your expenses to get it over here and your tariffs and all the things you have to do, it costs you a number where you've got to charge wholesale $75 in order to even make a $10 bill. And then they got to turn around and sell it for $150. So when you look at a rod that we're selling, my rods are retailing for $600. What I would tell you is I would stand beside anybody steelhead fishing with my 7 and 8 weight with any other high-end brand and challenge them to outfish me with the rod, or vice versa. I would let them use my rod and I would use their rod and say that those rods, because I was in the Bighorn Trout Shop just last week, I mean, they've got a couple rods in there for $1,100, just regular trout rods. And I'm looking at them and actually am saying, geez, I think these are made in the same factory my rods are made in because of what I'm looking at. Okay. I don't know that, but, and what justifies the $1,100. And, you know, I don't know if you remember the article way back. It was Fly Rods by the Numbers. And this guy, I forget what his name was. He took 3 columns of 10 words, and then he would pick any number, a combination of 3, and say 1, 2, 5, and 6. And he would just pull the word from there, and it would be something like proprietary dynamic speed, you know, was the marketing term. And there's a lot of that out there. You know, the bottom line is what really makes the rod good. And it comes down to, in the performance, what does a rod need to do for you? Well, let's go into the physics of it. It's called potential energy. And the reason why we have line weights, and if I take a 5 weight and I put a 4 weight on it, I can't flex the rod as much because there's not as much weight, and therefore I'm not going to generate because there's less flex, I won't get as much potential energy. If I put, let's say on a 5 weight, I put a 7 weight on, it's so much heavier that it overpowers the rod and diminishes the potential energy and kills it. So, you know, that's really what's going on in the rod. And you want to use that potential energy for you. You don't want it to be your arm making the cast. You want the rod to be making the cast. And, you know, those are kind of what I try to do in my rods. And I think I've done it. You know, with my close friends, as I was prototyping, I said, don't tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear. And when they all came back and say, hey, this is one hell of a great rod, I said, okay, is that really what you think? And, you know, they say, yes, this is what we think. And the only way for me to demonstrate that, you can't do it in a store. You know, people want to go in and do the wiggle test. And that's like, what's that tell you? It tells you nothing. And you go out and cast it on the grass. Yeah, it'll be a great overhand cast. But in steelhead fishing, you overhand cast less than half the time. You're roll casting or doing some other form of the cast. And this is where the rod actually shines in the spectacular in a chuck and duck situation. Now, I'll end it with this. But I also want an all-around rod. So, you know, the guys over at my local fly shop, International Angler, are fortunate to have 2, you know, nationally known chuck nymph fishermen, and that's Josh Miller and Joe Clark. And, you know, they're all about, you know, 2 and 3 weights because that's what they're doing in that fishing, and they want me to build them. And I said, well, I can, but I don't know what to build. I don't know how. Somebody's got to tell me why a rod is a good rod for chuck nymphing. And right now, I just don't have the bandwidth to go discover all that. I'm going to when I have time. I said, but and I don't have a 3 weight. I said, I have a 4 weight, 5 weight, and 6 weight, and 10'3". I have a 7 and an 8 weight and 10'3" for steelhead. In bass and permit and whatever you want to go fish in saltwater. The reason that I have those rods is they are actually built for nymph fishing and indicator fishing on the Bighorn River, you know, on the San Juan, you know, the Green River, any of those bigger bodies of water where you need power in order to actually control the line or to make the cast and, you know, to throw that weight. Yet I want it to be an all-around rod. So if a dry fly hatch starts to come off, you can very quickly pop everything off and dry fly fish if you don't have another rod or another rod rigged up. So I built those, and then the 9-foot threes, they're just built to the traditional length that is kind of embedded on everybody's brain, is that, they need the 9-foot rod. Just think about this, Marvin, 20 to 25 years ago, the thought process was to have an 8.5-foot rod. That's what everybody owned. And then they went to 9 foot, and now they're going out to 10 feet. And anyway, that's kind of my rod. I think it makes a difference. Again, you have to cast it to know.
Yeah, and so you've really kind of gone out and engineered the right rod for the right situation, right? So you've got kind of your heavier chuck and duck rods, and then your more versatile nymph rods that can do a little bit more, right?
Yeah. So let me throw something else out. I also owned a fly shop. That allowed me to buy a lot of rods at cost, or a lot of rods were given to me. Okay. And so I own a lot of fly rods. I've cast a lot of fly rods. Now, I'm going to be fair to all the other rod companies. Not recently, not in the last 4 or 5 years. Okay. But I have a broad spectrum of experience with various different rods. I own at least one rod from more than that. I probably got 3 or 4 rods from every major rod manufacturer out there, if not more. And I don't own right now a bad fly rod. Okay. I just own some rods that are much better. So out of all these rods that I have, what's the one I continuously pick up? And why do I do that? Because it's just better. And that's why I picked them up. And it's a better tool for the application. So, if I'm going into some little tight brook trout stream, well, there's a controversy there too. A longer rod gives you different capabilities than a shorter rod. Okay. But most people want to fish a short rod. I might grab a short one just to fish it because I haven't done it in a long time. But when you go into some of these fly shops and you got a clerk, and I don't want to diminish anybody that's, making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, how many fly rods have they actually gone and fished? And that's where, the rubber meets the pavement right there is have you fished the rod? And if you fished it, then I think you have the right to critique it and say, hey, it does this well and doesn't do that well, or, blah, blah, blah. And then also the right to compare it against another rod. It's just we can't do that. We can't drive every car out there in the world. And, we've owned a lot of cars and you have a good experience with it. You kind of stick with it until you experience something better. And that's like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd had this 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, right? I mean, in general, I think as fly shops it's become harder and harder to be profitable and have a fly shop. I think there are fewer and fewer shops that stock a lot of different rods, right? So that makes it hard. But I think too, listening to you talk about it, the other thing is, the conversation you have with someone who's buying their first 9-foot 5-weight is very, very different from someone that owns 3 or 4 of them. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
It's kind of like going in the golf pro shop and it's like, wow, why do I need a wedge kit? Right. It's like, well,
it is that. And, and then it depends on life stage and socioeconomics. And, when you have a lot of money, you can buy a lot of things. And when you don't have so much, and, I was at that life stage with 3 kids and braces and mountain bikes and hockey skates. And, so another fly rod was kind of an ouch to my wife, other than I bought them at a discount because I owned the fly shop. That's kind of the reason why I bought it.
Yeah, well, at least you didn't have a kid that had a horse habit, because that could have been super expensive.
I do have one with a horse habit.
Oh, well, gee whiz. What do you know? I'm shocked I see you out on the water.
she's now 35 and she's a veterinarian and she has her own horse and pays for her own horse. So
you can buy more rods now.
Exactly. I do have to tell this story real quick. My oldest son came to me about 2 years ago and said, Dad, I want to buy a boat. What do you think? And I said, well, I think it's a bad financial investment, but you want a boat, go buy one. Okay. And like 2 weeks later, my daughter comes to me and she goes, Dad, I'm thinking about buying a horse. What do you think? And I said the same thing. I said, well, it's a bad investment, but you want one, go buy it. And then she's out riding around the stable, English style. And my son came over and he's watching her ride around. And she got off the horse and walked up to the fence and said to, my son said, so Lauren, is that all you do is ride in a circle? And she goes, yeah, it's kind of like boating. So, and it's all what you get pleasure out of in life. You can't take the money with you. You need to invest wisely and plan for living a long life, but at the same time, you got to live every day. And, and when I look at a couple of things before we cut here, Marvin, is that to me, you're making an investment in a lifetime product. My warranty is what I call a limited lifetime, no fault warranty. The limited part is that I reserve the right, and it's totally at my discretion, to not warrant any rod that I think there was intentional abuse to, because there are some people that do that. And I did a lot of investigation and talking with people, what's going on. That won't be, 1% of the people who buy a rod. And then it's a lifetime no fault warranty. You slam it in the car door without doing it intentionally, it happens. And so you take a picture of the break, you give me a simple explanation what you did, and send me an email with the picture and the explanation of what you did. You also take a picture of the number that's on each blank, which tells me which rod it is, okay? And then the number of segment, starting at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I send you back with a code that you go online that puts you into a special part of my site that no one can look at unless you're doing a warranty claim. And it's $50, and I replace it. And I don't make any money at that. None of the manufacturers are all kind of the same, make any money at that. But it is just a way to say thank you for the business, and we understand stuff happens, and we can do this and not lose money. And, back in my day when we first started, there were no warranties until Orvis started that. And if you broke a $300 rod, you were just out. And you were going to break it. If you fish enough, you will break the rod. What is going to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know that people can purchase your rods through your site, but where else can folks find your rods?
Yeah. So, because of COVID, I really didn't travel much, but I've got good penetration. So right here locally in Pittsburgh, it's at International Angler Fly Shop. It's at Neshana Creek Fly Shop. It's in the new concept stores of Dick's Sporting Goods called Public Lands. You'll be seeing more of those throughout the nation shortly. And then it's in Fish USA, which is a big online retailer, a store called Tudor Hook and Nook. They're, servicing the steelhead fishing. It's in Cognac Creek Fly and Float. And did I mention Indiana Angler?
Not yet,
there's
but
a bunch of them.
Now you have.
Yeah, Indiana Angler, which I'm doing a presentation there tomorrow night on Steelhead. And hopefully soon to be in about 10 other ones. So I reached out to some people. I also talked to a lot of the people when I was in Montana fishing and I got some bites there, but I haven't consummated the deals yet. So I'll be putting it together. Unfortunately, I was waiting to go to the fly tackle dealer show where I could, meet with 200 or 300 dealers or whatever number was going to be there, and then also attempt to hire manufacturers reps. That's how you really build this distribution, is you've got to get manufacturers reps that call on the various stores. And then obviously I'm selling it online. And I encourage you, if you have a dealer that is one of those that I mentioned, that you give them the business, because if we don't take care of the dealer, we won't have them. And if you don't have a dealer, then I'd be happy to do it online. And it's basically jeffbloodflyfishing.com. And, I've got a e-commerce engine there that you can review the rods, and also my flies are on there, and make a purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we were talking about how important it is to get the rods in people's hands. And, obviously things are still a little bit iffy with the Delta variant of COVID, but, are you planning to hit the consumer show circuit this winter?
Well, I'm planning on it. I had COVID myself about 5 weeks ago, so I do have a little bit of natural immunity, and, looking at doing all the things necessary to attend those shows. I had talked to Ben Ferimsky, who runs the fly fishing shows, and I'm good friends with he and his father, so I plan on doing all those shows, and hopefully people, if they go to the shows, will come by and see me, and we can go to the casting pond and try the rods and have a discussion about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you gave people the URL for Jeff Blood Fly Fishing, and I'll drop that in the show notes. But Jeff, do you have any preferred flavors of social media ice cream you want to share with folks so they can kind of follow the company and follow what you're doing on the water?
Yeah, well, I have a Facebook page, and again, it's Facebook at Jeff Blood Fly Fishing, and then an Instagram account. I also do have a YouTube channel that I started. I only posted a few videos to, but I'm going to be doing this fall some, how-to things, how to rig for steelhead, some of those drift, how to make the drift in certain conditions and why, and all that type of thing, and maybe take it to a higher level. The issue there is I'm trying to look at how I go about doing the videos so that you can actually see what's going on in the drift. And I'm working on that. I've got a couple of pretty high-end marketing people that are working with me on that. So currently that's what I have right now. I've got a pretty good following. I've done nothing to try to boost anything yet. And, I'm a little behind at time. I'm a good marketer, but I'm a traditional marketer. So I got to get into the social stuff a little better.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know. It's a yin and a yang thing for sure. I have a love-hate relationship with it, but I will drop all of those links in the show notes, Jeff, and I really appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to chat with me this evening.
Marvin, as always, good chatting with you, and this fall is going to be epic, so get up here.
I'll work on it, and hopefully I'll see you on the water before I see you at a show.
Okay, let's do that. So have a good evening.
You too. Take care. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Again, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. Tight lines, everybody.